All right, so the G-20 is underway in Seoul, South Korea. We're, of course, following it very closely, and we're also tracking the largest economies for you. This shows you the largest economies a decade ago, back in 2000. You, of course, in the United States as the largest economy, a $10 trillion economy. China was in sixth place with $1.2 trillion in terms of its GDP. Let's skip ahead, though, 5 years and take a look at 2005. China moves up to the fifth spot. It pretty much doubles its GDP. The U.S. still leads. But where are we today? Well, here's where we are today. In 2010, the United States, still the biggest economy, $14.6 trillion economy. China jumps up to number 2. Let's bring in Paul and Monica because, Paul, as you said, this is not the G20 in many people's eyes. This is the G2.
Definitely. It's a very interesting point that China has leapfrogged ahead of Japan, is now the second largest economy in the world. And I think that's a big reason why there's so much attention on issues of trade, issues of currency that we're going to have at the G20 discussions.
There has been a lot of rhetoric about trade wars, and you look at how much more the U.S. imports than it exports, and on the other side, how much more China exports than it imports, and then you bring in the currency discussions into all of this and the devaluation, some say, of the yuan versus what the Fed is doing in the United States and the weight that has had on our dollar. I mean, this is all going to get a ton of focus.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, China has a surplus when it comes to trade. The U.S. has a big deficit. The funny thing is, though, that the U.S. is saying that China's manipulating the yuan, but many people could argue that maybe the U.S. is manipulating the dollar because
the
Fed's quantitative easing program is a definite intention to keep interest rates low, and we all know that the byproduct of that is likely to be a weaker dollar going forward, which could benefit U.S. exporters and U.S. manufacturers.
But then in the short term, and what the White House would say to this is that once the U.S. is strengthened, the economy is strengthened, which is what the Fed action or QE2 is attempting to do, then eventually you have a stronger dollar. Outside of that, you say you have to focus not just on these numbers, but on GDP per capita. Explain that.
Yeah, when you look at what's going on in the global economy over the past few years, it's undeniable that China has made incredible strides, and a lot of that is because of it's no longer this closed economy. But if you look at it on a per capita basis, we've got here the U.S. GDP per capita estimated for 2010, $47,132. If you go and you look at China, what we have there is $4,283, so it's about a tenth of what the U.S. is. It just goes to show that this emergence of a middle class, it's definitely happening in China, but let's not confuse the matter. China is not as wealthy from an individual standpoint as the U.S. is just yet. So that's something to keep in mind, even though there's a lot of concerns about China catching up to the U.S.
And the U.S. economy is still more than twice as large as the Chinese economy. But let's skip ahead because these are projections that came to us from the IMF. Let's skip ahead 5 years to 2015. Again, a similar trend. You see the U.S. moving up. It's estimated to an $18 trillion economy. China at 10. Anything on here that surprises you? Japan in third spot. This is what's estimated.
This is not really surprising at all. The good news from a perspective of the U.S. is that clearly the U.S. still has a sizable lead over China. But there are a lot of people who talk about if you go further out than this, 2030, 2040, will China be bigger than the U.S.? It's very likely.
But pay attention to per capita, pay attention to the population and what that means respective to the size of the economy. Finally, the host country, South Korea, a large ally in the United States, its biggest trading partner, China.
Yes, definitely. So it just goes to show that all of the global economies right now, every single nation is so interconnected. I mean, there had been this notion of quote-unquote decoupling, that what was good for one economy may not affect another economy, and that, I think, is just bogus. As much as there is this rhetoric between China and U.S. and other emerging markets and developed nations, we all need each other, and I think and hope that the powers that be realize that, because protectionist policies at this time where we have a global economy that's still fragile could be very disastrous.
Truly a global economy, still in many ways an economy in peril. You, of course, can log on to cnnmoney.com right here. Check out this chart for yourself, interactive. You can go back to any year you want, 2002, for example, and take a look at where we stood in terms of the 10 largest economies in the world.